I'm doing something a little bit different today because I wanted to take a break from editing the trailer videos that were a break themselves from editing the house videos. That's a lot of taking breaks, but at least they're productive ones. This video is about how I made this bench. It's carved out of one solid piece of cottonwood and took me about 29 hours. I'll be putting videos out about the tools I used and different uses for router planers, so be sure to check back for those soon. For now, I hope you like this video. Leave a comment, like, and subscribe if you do. There will be sections where you can just watch the work and I don't talk over it, so feel free to use the chapters to jump around. Getting this log into the truck was easy enough. We were able to use a bunch of stumps and boards from the waste transfer station that let us take it away for free to build a ramp-ish thing that we were able to kind of roll it up. Then we used some 1-inch steel pipe to roll it into the back of the truck. Getting this log out of the truck was a bit of a different story. We didn't have any plans other than slide and lift, and for a roughly 1,000 pound piece of dangerous, we actually ended up doing pretty okay. You can see earlier where I used a piece of 2x10 to protect the liftgate from his levering with my harpoon, and maybe we should have used that to lift it out. I don't know how effective it would have been, but it couldn't have been any worse. Anyway, when you're doing stuff like this with no mechanical advantages, you have to be able to communicate your limitations clearly. Santa knew his knee wouldn't let him move down with the log, so here's what we came up with.
What are we doing?
Well, you need to stand up more. Yeah, and then we can get it 2 feet out.
Okay.
Okay. Now keep yours standing tall.
Okay. It's gonna be okay.
Get your legs out.
All right.
Okay. A little on lifting really heavy things here. Notice that I keep my back totally straight as I take the weight down. And for once, Santa does too. Back injuries happen when 1, you're unprepared and not braced, and 2, when you let your back flex while loaded. So tighten up your core. I'll link to a video below that goes into more detail about that, and you should be pretty good to go. You might notice on the second part of the lowering that it went a fair amount faster and both of us lost good position. I think most of that came down to the geometry that Santa had, trying to lift it down from an angle instead of being right beside it. We'll rent a trailer to do it differently next time. Then it was just a matter of getting it roughly into place so I could work with it with lots of room to move around.
Up. Oh! Your foot.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, I need you not to pull like that.
Okay.
I'd wanted to be a tough guy and hold the end up on my own, but then I realized this is a perfect situation to use 2 harnesses. The best way to end a day of moving a heavy thing is to find out you caused a few $1,000s in damage to your vehicle. The first thing I had to do was to square off the log, and for that I had a template I made from some OSB left over from the trailer. Then I could trace it out to best fit and arrange the log using my laser to get one of the template edges fairly level. Since I want a square log and not slabs, the best way to cut this was to use a chainsaw on a rail instead of something like an Alaskan mill. The rail was just a 2x6 and I made the quickest, dirtiest chainsaw sled you'll probably ever see. The only thing I spent any time fussing was getting the holes drilled through properly because I had no bits of the right size and length, so I had to drill the holes from 2 different sides and have them meet up. This was not a good setup. It didn't cut square angles, and this chainsaw couldn't cut all the way through in one pass. That meant many passes, worse cuts, more wobble, and I even had to take the guide rail off to finish the cut. Then rearrange for the other side and do it all again. Getting those first 2 cuts done, which did include building the rail and sled jig for the chainsaw, and all the fuss that goes along with live streaming over on twitch.tv/moosedoesstuff, took a little over 4 hours. The second day was more of the same and took about 3.5 hours, so I could have squared this in one day, but I also wanted to get out for some bike riding in the last good days of summer. The third day was all about getting the top flat and the feet to match. I was making the top of my bench first, and I wanted it to be perfectly flat and as even as possible with the bottom. So I started by leveling the stand the log was on. Then I wanted to make a rotor planer sled, which, despite there being dozens upon dozens of dedicated videos on YouTube to the subject, is really pretty stupid simple. I do have some gripes to make about how YouTubers use their sleds though, and I'll make a dedicated video for that later. For now, know that you only really need a couple of things for a rotor planer: a box or sled for your rotor to move in, and 2 guide rails for the sled to move along. And a rotor, I guess, but whatever. With the bottom supports level, I could set the rails up using my laser line and my spirit levels. You also need to be sure that your rails aren't going to be damaged by the router, so for mine I had to remount them with 2x2 spacers between the rails and the log. I knew I'd have some areas that were just way too high, so I attacked those with the power planer first before moving on to evening out the surface. I was hoping I could get away with not installing end stops on the sled, but quickly found it was a little too short to get away with that, so on they go. I had to take off more than I really wanted to because of how bad a job I did with the chainsaw, but as we'll see, that actually worked out for the best in the end. And yes, I am doing the whole "this mistake that I couldn't avoid actually made things better" that YouTubers love to do. Once the top was plain flat, I had to stop for a social media picture, then get the whole thing turned over so I could plane down where the feet would be. I spent a lot more time than you'd think cleaning, and almost as much just moving the thing around. I spent very little time putting the stand it was on together, which meant that it fell apart a lot, and that led to a lot of relifting and rebuilding. It only has a very small amount of contact with the floor, so I didn't need to do much, but I did need it to be as even as possible so the bench would sit level. I tried to achieve that with the laser, but also double checked with the measuring tape and ended up using a scrap of 2x4 to make comparative marks. Then I just kept taking down the longer end until it matched the shorter. I got to end the day by testing out my new power carving blade. It's pretty gnarly.
So this isn't scary at all. Not in the slightest bit scary, this. Geez, that is so close to the guard. We got 1/8 of an inch, we're fine. All right, here we go. Don't do this without parental supervision. Okay, so first impressions, using it is less scary than it looks by like a lot. Don't forward into it, it chunks up too much, but pulling with it is just fine. Let's check RPM vary. Further impressions, higher RPM does equal smoother cut, but this is not a fine finish tool. No matter how much control you try to have, it just will never be that. You can lean into it pretty good. Let's adjust the guard just a little bit less back in my face. Yeah, so no matter what you do, it's never gonna be a smooth finish. It's not meant to be. Like, it does okay. It'll chew stuff up pretty quick. That's what it's there for, is this is the chew stuff up quick tool. Like, it'll take actual chunks, big fibrous chunks out. Well, could have done that with the axe. I could have done that with a chainsaw. I could have done that with name another tool. That's not the point. The point of this is that it gives you some degree of precision while still chewing the material up pretty good. The fourth day was the start of the rough shaping. The best way I could come up with to do this was to make a pattern out of MDF, sharpie it on both sides of the log, and start making cuts with the chainsaw. Chainsaws, regardless of how you try to ply them with chocolate or alcohol, just do not want to cut curves. So I took a lesson from calculus and turned the curve into an infinite amount of straight lines. Well, maybe not an infinite amount, but enough that I could fake a curve with the resolution my chainsaw would give me. After that, I started to cut it down closer to shape with the power carving blade, which was sort of moot because I ended up changing how I'd approach the whole thing on the next day. There we go. This will get a little bit awkward as we continue on, but now I can get that exactly lined up. So this will take a little bit of time. I'm gonna cut this a little bit wide, so if I make a mistake, I can trim in a bit. This is a lead into another part of my gripe about rotor planers and YouTubers, but I realized that you can use a rotor planer to make intentional curves, not just flat surfaces. So I printed a better version of my pattern, taped it together, and cut it out of a couple of new pieces of MDF. I nearly started work before someone in my Twitch chat reminded me I needed spacers. Yay for Twitch chat. I started with the power planer instead of the router because of how much material needed to be removed. Router does good detail, but poor chunk flinging. It definitely takes some time, but I'm able to get a basically perfect copy of my curve template out with my router planer. There are limits to how tight you can concave plane based on the geometry, but all in all, it worked out really well. Something to point out with this rotor planer sled that I made is that it collected a lot of dust. That dust gummed it up, and I spent a lot of time brushing the sled out. After the majority of the planing was done, I just couldn't wait to see how it would turn out, so I grabbed the grinder and sanded it down a bit. The longer end gave me a little bit of extra difficulty because, again, I am bad with a chainsaw. I overcut and had to make up for that with my routing. Day 6 is the start of the actual power carving, which I've been pretty nervous about because I know I am no sculptor. To make it easier, I drew some lines on with the square and my shape templates. That way I would at least have something I could reference for some degree of symmetry. I'll talk more about the not crazy expensive shaping and sanding tools I used for this in another video as well, but the TLDR is you really don't need anything expensive like the Sabertooth, the King Arthur's, Arbortech, or even Kutzall power carving discs. Be sure to check for the more detailed video on what I use coming out in a few days. I'll just leave you with the teaser that all the carving attachments I used cost less than $50 total. They're stopping. Oh, they're going. Nope. What's up? Yes. Do you want to come have a look?
Sure, we'll park around front.
Sure, I'll meet you there. Yeah, yeah. All right, well, I get to do an impromptu showing. Hands are okay for feeling symmetry, but they're really good at feeling bumps. Running my hands along even these curved surfaces was enough to tell me where I needed to take down a little bit more. To try to fill in the dead space a bit, I can tell you some more of the other attachments I used for this. If you remember back to my trailer welding videos, I went through 5 or 6 different grinding options to get the old rust, paint, and mill scale off the metal before I could weld, prime, and repaint. The most economical option I could come up with was a grinder backing pad with various grits of sanding discs attached. So I tried that again here and it worked a treat. After the cutting was done with the scary looking 3-blade disc, I moved to the 24 grit sanding pad, then to a 40 grit. The 24 smoothed out any rough points the cutter had left behind, and the 40 got me within working distance for the orbital sander I would use for the next step. The last day was sanding. I worked my way up from the 40 of the previous day through 60, 80, 120, 180, and then puffed the grain before going to 240 grit. You might think I'm playing fast and loose with no mask on while sanding, but a shop vac with cyclone attachment and the DeWalt orbital sander got easily 99% of the dust, and I'm in a very well ventilated space. When checking how much dust was missed, my black glove picked up basically nothing. I drew pencil lines on everything, sanded with a grit until the pencil lines are gone, then moved up. This covers the broad strokes, but Stumpy Nubs has much better sanding tutorials if you're looking for more detail. After the sanding, I got to put it in place. Jump ahead to the marker in the description to see that process. If you didn't jump ahead, you get to see me grinding on the top step of a ladder. That was fun. All right, once up over the edge and then stop before we get to the step. Almost. There we go. Two more. Beauty. Okay, I actually had another idea how to deal with this. That might work. I would be very, very, very sad to damage those stairs. I worked very hard on them. Yay for extra staging towels. This is the long end. I think we put that to the right. Heck yeah! Heck yeah! Yeah, there's a little bit of blue over there still. Guys, I have a bench. I have a bench. Yay.